undermine free speech. Emma, why do you think this definition is dangerous and counterproductive?
There are a number of reasons why I think that the definition was hastily adopted by the political parties that you mentioned. The APPG definition particularly is based on a concept of cultural racism. And as you mentioned, the current legislation, there are a number of pieces of legislation that protect people from being discriminated against on the basis of their religious belief, including Muslims. But the definition of Islamophobia intentionally goes beyond that because it wants to deal with sort of amorphous issues to do with structural racism. It even includes microaggressions in its in the APPG report. And so this concept of
what are they?
So I mean, exactly what are they?
Well, OK, in what way does it limit or curtail the right to criticise and indeed to ridicule an idea, so which we cherish? It's one of the great crowning glories of the Enlightenment from the 17th century. Is that imperilled?
Yes. So I think because of this concept of cultural racism, it makes it difficult to discuss particular aspects of culture and belief. For example, if someone were to criticise the wearing of the niqab, if someone were to, because that could potentially be described as, an expression of Muslimness. If we just look at one example from the APPG report, they said that using a phrase like, for example, Muhammad is a paedophile, has as its intention the harm of a Muslim individual or the Muslim community, rather than it being a statement about Muhammad as an individual. And so the report is forced to discriminate between legitimate and illegitimate criticism of Islam. And from the very beginning of the use of Islamophobia, it's always been muddied up with issues to do with blasphemy. There have been people who have described this, I think rightly, as being a sort of backdoor blasphemy law, because it has made particular reference to things about, say, for example, saying that Islam has conquered by the sword or subjugated minorities.
We'll come to that point, spread by the sword. A lot of historians are extremely worried about that. They feel their freedom of expression and history is being erased. And also, we'll ask delicately the point about the paedophile. You hear that a lot online. It's prima facie extremely offensive to people who hold Muhammad dear, but we'll discuss that. But what about this thing? If I can, Mariam, put it to you, the point that Emma made there about expressions of Muslimness. Now, that could be, and as I presume top of the list there would be the burqa or the veil. Now, it's perfectly legitimate debate to have, to debate that and to say, from one side of the debate, to say it degrades women, it dehumanises women, and it is something that takes them away from society, and it's something that objectifies them. And it's perfectly legitimate for other people to say, no, it doesn't. Is that debate threatened?
I think, with regards to all of these statements, they're empty without any context. So, with regards to Muslimness, for instance, you're quite right. There are several different expressions of Muslimness. Now, what's important...
Are we still able to criticise the burqa,
yes,
objectifying women, degrading women, relegating women?
Anyone can hold beliefs. So, as citizens in a pluralistic, inclusive democracy, we all have rights of thinking and believing what we wish. But in terms of expression, of course, expressing it too openly and disseminating, etc. But the point here is when things become problematic is if things are said in order to provoke or incite hatred. Now, that's where the lines are blurred. So it's okay to say something...
The law already says that. That's already covered.
That's absolutely fine. But with regard, yeah, so if in terms of the definition and why it's necessary, is because a lot of people don't actually know what Islamophobia actually means and what it entails. There's so many people... Think about it this way. 5% of the British population is Muslim. Why is it that 50% of religiously aggravated hate crimes are perpetrated against Muslims? And especially when figures of authority, they say things like the comment by Boris Johnson about Muslim women, 375% increase in reported hate crimes according to
That's rude, and it was in a certain context. But is it OK to say that the niqab dehumanises, degrades and objectifies women?
Look, what we say...
Is it OK to say that?
Words hold meaning, and when terrorists far-right extremists use those words to commit mass atrocities or
Academics
killings.
use those words. And
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's
it
the
depends who says
intent.
it.
It's the intent, right? And if it's purposefully out there to provoke, incite hatred, right? We could say these
But that's
things.
subjective.
Can I give...
One second. I just want to, surely it's a no-brainer, Mariam, isn't it? Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Criticism of Islam is not Islamophobic. Is that the golden rule?
That's the point of a definition, is to separate targeting Muslims for their Muslimness from the ideology itself. We should be able to critique ideologies, religions, etc., but the manner and decorum in which we express ourselves is vital.
Extremely subjective. Thank you. The manner of, Peter, do you understand the manner and decorum point? And also, I suppose we can infer from that who says it?
Well, I think the bigger issue is this definition says Islamophobia is rooted in racism. But that doesn't make sense because neither Islam nor Muslims are a race. They're white Muslims. Yeah. Plus, of course, Islam is an idea, and all ideas should be open to criticism and scrutiny, including my own. When it comes to Muslimness, there's no definition, and which Muslimness do you accept? Is it the Muslimness of the Sufi Muslims, the Sunni Muslims, the Shia Muslims, the Ahmadi Muslims? There's disputes and disagreements within Islam itself about what constitutes a true Muslim. I think a much better term than Islamophobia is anti-Muslim prejudice, because Islamophobia puts the focus on the idea, whereas I want to defend Muslim people. People must come first. It's okay to discriminate against ideas. It's not okay to discriminate against Muslim people. And finally, I'd say that I've had personal experience of this. When I criticise...
Well, the policy exchange thing.
Well, well, there's other... I'll give you another different example. When I criticised Hizb Tahrir, an Islamist extremist group, who said that Muslims who leave the faith should be put to death, I was defending the Muslim community from their hatred and threats of violence. But I was denounced by them as being Islamophobic. They said that their belief that Muslims who leave the faith was rooted in the Islamic tradition and that I was being Islamophobic. So that's the kind of danger that you have. And I was actually arrested. I was arrested by the police and had to fight a court case to defend my right to criticise their murderous incitements to kill Muslims who left Islam.
Jimmy, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, so Islamophobia isn't rooted in racism. It's actually rooted in an attempt to silence people from criticising Islam. And at the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, we are people from Muslim heritage. So my family is Pakistani, and if I want to criticise Islam and then I'm accused of being Islamophobic, which race exactly is it that I'm being racist against? Am I being racist against
Mariam,
my Pakistani mum?
I want to explore what it says in the guidelines and what the problem is. Mariam, answer that point.
With regards to racism, it is a social construct. It's an empty vessel until we associate meaning with it. So you're right in saying sort of what is race? That should be the question itself, because until we truly understand racism, Muslims might not be a race, Islamophobia might not be considered racism, but Muslims are racialized, right? So when you talked about white Muslims, certain women who are white and are Muslim might wear a hijab. Now, they are racialized as Muslims, so certain attributes of their identity or expression of Muslimness are then racialized as Muslim. So it's about expanding those terms, so we should have a debate regarding that.
OK, Tariq, I want to just welcome Professor Tariq. I want to look at a couple of tropes of abuse, if I may, and go through them so we establish where we are. Because what Mariam says, it's fascinating. It depends whether it's a provocation or a detailed and informed point. This is the blurred line, and that in itself might be a warning sign to people. They may be accused of Islamophobia when they don't have a racist bone in their body, for example. This business, and you see it so often, and it's so unpleasant and clearly designed, you see it on social media a lot, designed to offend. The paedophile point, Mohammed is a paedophile. Is it okay to say he married a 9-year-old?
I think...
factually, is that okay to say that?
Well, if it's factually true, of course it's okay to say.
Is it factually true?
There's a lot of debate on this.
Yeah.
I realise there's debate on it.
So I don't know the answer to that question, whether it's factually true. But it might be true.
Right.
So people could raise questions about the Prophet Muhammad's marriages and his sex life and so on. That shouldn't be prohibited. That's not Islamophobic. How you do it could be Islamophobic. You yourself have said people might accuse the Prophet of being a paedophile. That's not just a debate about what age, was a wife and so on, because a paedophile is a predator. So if some people have some evidence that the Prophet Muhammad abused women and girls and so on, then they should produce the evidence. They shouldn't just throw the charge of paedophile, because that's clearly offensive and aggressive, and is not part of a reasoned debate.
I suppose you could say there were debates, there's debates to be had about when puberty was seen as womanhood on the Arab Peninsula at that particular time, different standards for different times. It was something common across European royal families at the time. There is all that. But you can understand how many people would be offended by the concept. But, OK, we're getting somewhere. It's interesting. What about the point that eminent historians have made, such as Tom Holland, that saying Islam was spread by the sword or subjugates is Islamophobic? Because, the Islamic Empire, they weren't handing out leaflets, were they? And clearly that would be a problem when you're talking about the siege of Constantinople and so forth. So what would you say to Tom Holland, for example, who says history is being erased?
No, I don't see that. I mean, I think making sweeping generalizations can be Islamophobic. But, like you mentioned, the siege of Constantinople or other conquests or wars and so on.
Bloody conquests.
Yeah,
wars,
just as we talk about Christianity and all the wars that have been fought
Crusades.
Amongst Christians.
So if you say the Crusades
was expansion and subjugation of other people.
But this is not what this is about.
Islam is no more subject to a generalization about war and conquest than Christianity is.
But indeed so. The Crusade, it would stop people, if there would be a level playing field, talking about the Crusades. In the guidelines it says, saying Islam is spread by the sword is Islamophobic.
Well, I think as a simple generalization it can be, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
that shows exactly the problem.
Sorry?
This shows exactly the problem. So even when people have criticised this for being, trampling on free speech and civil liberties, the APPG report itself actually says that even criticising the definition on the grounds of free speech is just another form of anti-Muslim hatred that uses criticisms